Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and damn it, it's in studio mode, but today we're going to be doing some measurements. I'm just not going to touch that wire. Of memory power consumption. So, oh, well, I guess you can't see the settings, can you? Oh no, you can. So, yeah, 1.5 volts. Advanced frequency. So here we have our... Nope, that's the wrong advanced memory settings. There. Forgotten how the BIOS is laid out. So yeah, we have 3000 megahertz, 16, 16, 36 timings. Why are we running lower timings than the memory kit is spec'd for? Just don't ask. It's whatever random settings I have left on this system. So yeah, let's just quit without saving, go straight into Windows. But basically, I've modified this motherboard with this right here, which that is a 3 milliohm shunt resistor in between the output of the memory VRM inductor and the memory power plane, so the VDDR power plane. And the whole point of this is that we can measure the voltage and the current going through that power plane, and basically get a measurement for how much power the memory controller and the memory combined use. And yeah, that's basically, you know, it's like that's how that works, or at least that's how that's implemented. And yeah, I've done it on a Gigabyte X370 Gaming K5, which is not the best board of choice for doing something like this, just because it's not that great at memory overclocking. So yeah, and also it's completely useless. Like, the other thing is because we're also including the memory controller power consumption in these measurements. It's not that great because well, it doesn't like for Intel, you're going to have a different memory controller power consumption, or at least I would assume you'd have a different memory controller power consumption, at least slightly. So yeah, anyway, so just wanted to show you like a close-up of how that's actually implemented, and then I measured the voltage off of one of the capacitors on the output of that VRM as well. So yeah, anyway, here's the actual test setup. So as you can see, we are just in Windows right now. And first we're going to take a memory voltage measurement, which this board should be, yeah, so we're going to measure about 1.513 volts. All right, this is currently at idle, so we're going to be measuring slightly lower voltage because the voltage controller, I think, the feedback is set up somewhere further down the power plane, because obviously there's going to be power, like, as the current travels through the power plane and up the memory sticks and through all the different pins, there's going to be a little bit of voltage drop, and so you're actually going to be measuring like I'm measuring right on the output of that VRM. It's going to be measuring slightly high, but that's fine. That's just normal. That's basically how it's supposed to work. I have a memory stick that's modified with voltage read points specifically to avoid that, so that I can get a voltage measurement directly from a memory stick. Anyway, right now, if we measure the voltage drop across the shunt resistor, we get about 11.3 millivolts. So we're just going to round that up to 12, divide by 3. Right now we're basically pushing 4 amps at like 1.5 volts. So the memory is pulling like 6 watts. Well, the memory system, not the memory. The memory itself is not pulling 6 watts. It's the whole memory system. So memory controller and the memory sticks. And I think the dominators actually power their RGB off of the VDDR rail. So those are actually like the LEDs are also included in that measurement. And actually, I could like disconnect the LEDs on one of these memory sticks. Unfortunately, I don't think this is sensitive enough or accurate enough so that we could distinguish between what the RGB is pulling and what the rest of the system is pulling, because I think the RGB is probably, well, I don't know how much the RGB is pulling. I'd assume it's not very much, right? Like, you don't need a lot of power to get an LED to light up really bright. So yeah, I mean, just the LEDs all over this board are a great demonstration of that. So yeah. Anyway, so right now we're pushing about 4 amps at like 1.5 volts. And if we open up something like memtest, right, we're going to run test 14 gigs. Windows tab so that we can see all the windows nicely, there. So you can see them. That's a great trick to use if you're mem testing and you're not using the system. Just Windows tab it, and you can go away and you can come back and check all the windows at once, even if you have like 20 of them open or something. So yeah, though there are obviously other memory testing applications, I just use memtest because I'm used to it. So, and I haven't been bothered to find a different memory testing application. But now our current consumption is actually pretty high. So right now we're measuring about 30, almost 34 millivolts of drop across the shunt resistor. So we're just going to round that out down to 33, which is about 11 amps. And we're pushing about 1.5, yeah, 1.515 volts-ish, right? So basically somewhere around 15, wait, what is it? Somewhere around 16 watts of power consumption right now. So yeah, and that's at 3000 megahertz CL16, and that's basically it. So yeah, you can measure memory power consumption like that. This board's not that great at memory overclocking. The CPU is also not that great at memory overclocking, so that's kind of, like, I have a bunch of measurements, so, you know, I wanted to show how this actually works, and now we're going to take a look at some of the measurements I've actually taken with this configuration, and talk a little bit about those. But yeah, anyway, here's the studio mode. Okay. Bam! So here's the actual measurements, yeah, so I don't know what they're sorted by. I think they're sorted by power consumption. Yeah, so right now they're sorted by power consumption. So idiot me decided that he's just going to take, like, idiot me decided to just take a bunch of pretty random measurements, because basically, you know, I didn't have very high expectations for this thing to work. So I built it, and then I was like, and then I basically just threw random memory configurations at it that were convenient. So basically whatever I had lying around on the desk at the time, I just picked up and stuck it in the board and was like, ooh, that's what that pulls, and that's what this pulls, and then what about this voltage and that voltage? And anyway, yeah, so you can see here, so what I've highlighted right now is basically 1.5 volts, 4 DIMMs, and a variety of frequencies. So all of those are at 1.5 volts, but different frequencies and same memory configuration. And you can basically see that even at, so from 2133 to 3400 megahertz, the power consumption doesn't actually change that much, right? Which is like the thing that I really wanted to point out, is that we are going from, you know, 2133, 1.5 volts, all the way to 3400 at 1.5 volts, and it basically makes, what is it, like 4 watts difference? Yeah, 4 watts difference in terms of peak power consumption. So yeah, that's kind of neat, is just like, yeah, it doesn't really change your power consumption that much. Now, obviously, I could also do power consumption versus memory timings, and, you know, like, basically, if I was really bored, I could probably test, like, forever with this kind of thing. Like, this could go on literally forever. Anyway, other noteworthy, interesting results. So I think I tested 2x8. Okay, no, that's useless. There should be like a fixed frequency, different voltages result somewhere. No. Well, okay, so you get like... Idiot me, why didn't I do a 1.8 volts 2133 test? Well, I didn't, so too late. So this is one of the issues with me just kind of like, you know, I built it and I just kind of threw memory configurations in it and was like, ooh, neat, this does that, this does this. Oh wait, I think I found it. There, so 3400 that, and there was one other. No, oops, wrong one. Oh, this one. That's 1.5 volts, 3400. And then we have, yeah, 1.3. Yeah, and I guess it didn't run 1.2 volts 3400 or whatever, so that one's not in there. But yeah, that gives you some idea of like voltage versus power consumption scaling, and that's actually pretty significant, right? So going from 1.35 volts to like, well, 1.364 volts to 1.515 volts, the power consumption went up by 5 watts, which is basically a lot. Let's just leave it at a lot. Like, it's a big percentage, because I'm not going to figure out, well, 5 watts is out of 13. And then when we go all the way up to like 1.8 volts, you can see that it actually hits 24 watts. Now, obviously, I wouldn't daily 1.8 volts, because it's actually, with these memory sticks, it's actually horrendously unstable. This run right here was actually a massive pain to just run long enough for it to not crash. That was really annoying to do, because it was just like, as soon as you start memtest with these kinds of settings, it's just super unstable. And also, I didn't want to like set up max mem, because then we wouldn't be able to use all of the memory and that kind of thing. But anyway, so yeah, you know, I maxed it out at almost 30 watts of power consumption. Now, it would be interesting to see if, like, you know, maybe on like an Intel platform doing like maybe 4.4 gigahertz memory clock at like 1.5, maybe 1.6 volts on 4x8 DIMMs, how much power that would pull. But the thing is, it really doesn't scale that much from frequency, right? As I showed earlier, it was like, what, 4 watts from like 17 to 21? Yeah, it was like 4 watts. So that was kind of interesting. Another thing worth noting is that most of the power consumption we're seeing is actually probably just the memory controller, because this test right here, this was, I think the first test I did is just like one 8 gig stick, right? And then when you add a whole nother 8 gig stick to a different memory channel, okay, like that is a different memory channel. That's 2x8 on 2 separate channels. It only increases the power consumption by about 3 watts, which is just like, really, to me, that's really surprising, because it's like we literally loaded up, and like basically the bandwidth of this configuration right here is twice that of the configuration right there. Like, you basically get double the bandwidth with this configuration over that one. And yet it doesn't double the power consumption, which to me is kind of like, whoa. Evidently, a lot of the power that is going through this is not going into the memory sticks, or even like it's going into the memory controller, is what I'm trying to get at. So yeah, that's pretty neat. And that's obviously under load. And then if you go from 2x8 to all the way to 4x8 and keep the same voltage, same frequency, it barely makes a difference. Right? Like, you pick up a watt. So that's kind of surprising. Now, actually, even at the really high voltage, though, you know, we see a bit more of a difference, where it's like, okay, 24 versus like 29 watts at 1.8 volts for 2x8, 3400. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting how at different settings that behaves quite differently. I think I have 2x8, 1.5 volts. Yeah, so 1.5 volts, it actually is still a pretty small difference there. Right? It's just like 3 watts. So, so that's kind of interesting. So obviously a lot of the power in this whole configuration is just going into the memory controller, and it's not going into the memory sticks, because adding a whole extra memory stick and an extra memory channel made a difference of 3 watts. So it's just like, okay, so I don't know, maybe like 1.5 watts of that is the memory controller, and another 1.5 watts is the memory stick. It could be also 1 to 2, right? Like an extra 1 watt on the memory controller and 2 watts for the memory stick. And then here it's going to be like 2 watts memory stick, 6 watts memory controller, or something like that. So it would be really nice if I could isolate the memory sticks from the memory controller in terms of power consumption, but at the same time, obviously different memory stick configurations put different amounts of load on the memory controller, so it's just like, okay, well, you know, it's like, yeah, it's like, okay, a memory stick pulls 2 watts, but a memory stick, you know, one memory stick pulls, like, with the memory controller, pulls 8, whereas 2 pull 11. So it's not like you do plus 2, plus 2, plus 2, right? Because for this, if it was a static amount of power added for each memory stick, it'd be like, well, you'd expect this to have the same, like, if we go, okay, so from 8 to 3 watts, so then it should be like plus 6 watts. This should be like 17, right? But it isn't. It's literally just like plus 1 watt over 2x8. So that's kind of interesting, but that's probably just because the extra memory sticks spend most of their time just idling, right? Because you can't actually, like, if you put an extra memory stick on the same memory channel, you can't access it, right? Like, you can't access both memory sticks at the same time, so it doesn't double the throughput of that memory channel, and so it shouldn't double the power consumption of that memory channel. So that makes sense. But obviously there's like a fixed amount of power that the memory sticks pull just by existing. So that's kind of, I think, probably where most of that power consumption difference is. And also that would explain why there's bigger disparities at like higher voltages. Because you're sort of fixed, like the idle power consumption of that memory stick is just going to be high, like there's going to be more of a difference in it's going to be a bigger amount of idle power consumption for each memory stick at higher voltage than at lower voltage, right? So that's why, you know, when you're at 1.5 volts 2x8 versus 1.5 volts 4x8, there's more of a difference than at going from 2x8 at 1.2 volts to 4x8 at 1.2 volts. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Also, I tested out, you know, my 32 gig DIMMs just because they're huge, and I was like, well, do they pull a lot of power? Well, no, they don't. Even at 1.364, like the thing is also I can't clock them very high because Ryzen, like I'm testing with Ryzen 1700, and you might be like, why aren't you using a 2700X? The 2700X is in a different motherboard, and I couldn't be bothered to pull it out. So that's basically what happened there. But yeah, so I tested 2666, and that's basically just a restriction of the CPU. It doesn't go any higher. It would be really cool. Like, the thing is, at this point, it's just like, it would be really nice to modify like an Intel motherboard to be able to test like really high frequency and really aggressive memory settings. And maybe also mod like an X299 board. Like, basically, I need like one motherboard per platform to do this kind of measurement, which is really annoying as far as I'm concerned, right? Because different memory controllers will pull different amounts of power. Different memory configurations pull different power, different memory. Like, I want to see like how memory timings affect the power consumption. Obviously, voltage changes power consumption. So, yeah, there's like a lot of testing that I'd have to potentially like. Well, I'd need to mod more boards, but initially, I think this is just kind of cool that hey, this is actually a way that you can do this that works. Right, which initially I was wondering, like, maybe this'll cause the memory to just get really unstable and it'll be completely useless. But this motherboard wasn't really that amazing at memory overclocking before, and after it's still fine, or it's not any worse than it used to be, so that's fine. Also, it doesn't help that like I think with a 2700X I could probably run a couple hundred megahertz higher, but yeah, I'm on a, as I said, 2700X was too far away. It wasn't on the, well, actually. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's in another motherboard. So that's my excuse. And I can't be bothered to like unmount the cooling system just to pull it out. Because I have some other testing that I was doing with that system, so yeah, it's just like Buildzoid priorities. Why use the good CPU if you can just grab a random piece of junk out of a drawer, right? Like, anyway, yeah, so I just thought these measurements were kind of interesting, and it's also interesting that, yeah, you really, like, if you want to push more than, like, 20-ish watts, at least on Ryzen, it seems to be really difficult. It should, like, I really want to test now an Intel board, but the thing is, like, I don't really want to do this kind of modification to a actually nice motherboard, because, like, it's not, it's not dangerous or unreliable or anything like that. Or at least not super dangerous or super unreliable or anything like that. It's just that I would prefer not to mess up my nice motherboards, right? If that makes any sense. So, yeah, as cool as all of these measurements are, it's just like, I'd need like a lot more spare motherboards to do this on, is basically what I'm getting at. And I'm not saying like, hey, this is something I want to do, it's just like, I'm not interested in screwing up nice boards to do these kinds of measurements. But they are interesting to look at and potentially, that kind of thing. So, yeah. Also, I'm not interested, like, the thing is, these are also really boring to take. Like, the results are interesting. The measurements themselves suck to take, but yeah, anyway, I just wanted to show this and go like, hey, this is a thing now. So you might see some more, like, I might play with this some more, but don't expect too much from it, because, like, at most I'm probably going to adapt this onto an Intel motherboard that can actually go fast. Do I have a motherboard that can go fast that I don't care? Oh. I do have one board that can, I think it did up to 4600. Okay, yeah, I have another board that I consider pretty much spare that can do like 4600. So we can use that. It won't do 4000. I don't think it does 4012, but it can do like 3812 or something like that. So, yeah, I have another motherboard that I can do it. The thing is, I have boards that can do like 4800 as well, and it's just like, well, don't want to use those because those are too nice. But yeah, cool little thing that I can do. Like, hey, we can measure memory controller and DDR4 power draw, and basically, like, the primary motivation behind me doing this was for recently what I've started doing with my PCB breakdowns is just ignoring the memory VRM, because it's just like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't push enough power, it doesn't get that hot, who cares? And I stand by that, because it really does, like, it only pushes at most like 13 amps, which really doesn't produce that much heat. Also, it's not in like a particularly like that memory. The memory VRM on a motherboard is really not located in like a general hotspot, right? Like the VRM is right next to the CPU, and it's just like the CPU's hot, the VRM's hot. It's a total airflow dead zone also. Whereas this is on the front edge of the motherboard. Like if there's a cool spot in your case, it's where the memory VRM is, right? Like roughly in that area, it's going to be. It's if you have front intake. If you run a more exotic airflow setup, then it's going to be who knows where, but. Anyway, yeah, so this is just kind of proof that memory doesn't pull enough power for me to care about it. Like, okay, like 28 watts is significant, but still not significant enough to care about it. Right? Like from a voltage regulator perspective, because it's a decent amount of power, but it's a relatively high voltage and not really high current, and obviously, the main concern is really high currents. Now, voltage also plays a role, but current is more concerning than the voltage alone. So, yeah, that's it for this video, and I guess thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, then I have a Patreon. The beep was the multimeter turning off. I have a Patreon. I also have Teespring. So Teespring, you can buy things like shirts, posters, stickers, socks, hoodies, so all kinds of AHOC merch. If you don't want to buy anything and you just want to support me directly, I do have a Patreon. You can find a link to both of those down in the description below. They do help out immensely with doing, well, stuff like this, I guess. But at this point, I have so many boards. I guess I could go out and buy like a nice board to modify like this instead of just using the junk boards to do this, but and I still feel like that would just be a waste of a nice board. Anyway, so yeah, it does help out with running the channel when I want to do more, like, when I want to test bad ideas, that's where it really helps out. Anyway, so that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.